O tihei Māori ora. He mihi ana ngā mana whenua ki tēnei e takiwa. Ka te māmoe a Waitaha, kaitahu whānui katoa, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ka runaka o tākou, pukitaraki, moeraki, tēnā rā koutou katoa. E nā mana e nā reo, ro rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E nā manahiri, nau mai haere mai ki o tākou whakaihu waka. Whānau mā, tauira mā, kaimahi mā, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Grant Robertson taku ingoa, ko na tumu whakarai ki o tākou whakaihu waka. Greetings everybody, I'm Grant Robertson, I am the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Otago. Welcome one and all to this exciting and illustrious event, the Inaugural Professorial Lecture for Alex Macmillan. You are most welcome here in the Archway Lecture Theatres. It's good to see such an excellent turnout of people, both from Alex's professional and personal lives. I want to start by acknowledging our official party, who are up the front here. That is Professor Trish Priest, Professor Alex Macmillan, Emeritus Professor Jenny Connor, Associate Professor Trudy Sullivan, and Deputy Vice-Chancellor Pacific, Professor Diane Sika-Poltonu. It is great to be here with such a fine group of wahine up the front this evening. I'll do my best to be the token male in the official party. I am, as I said, delighted to welcome you to this special occasion. Promotion to Professor is the pinnacle of our academic career path. It represents a strong career of excellence in teaching, research, and in service. Trish will say more shortly about Alex's work across the three areas that we measure folks on becoming professors. But I want to say at a personal level, Alex, that your work as a public health physician and academic sitting at the intersection of the most pressing issues of our time, sustainability, health equity, and our response to climate change is an indication of the importance of your work, the significance of it to our country, and I want to thank you for the work that you do across all spheres of your academic and indeed personal life. I want to make a particular acknowledgement of your inter and transdisciplinary approaches. That is the way of the future to address those significant issues that I have just mentioned, and your focus on the community in everything that you do. That exemplifies what we want from our professorial staff, and you are a very deserving recipient of the title of Professor. I want to acknowledge your family and those who are close to you who are here. Your mother Jill, who is joining us online. Kia ora Jill, welcome. I hope you enjoy this and that the technology stays with us for the evening. I want to acknowledge your mother-in-law Chris, your husband Andrew, and I've been told to use this word, offspring, Karis. Your close friend Pamela, Emeritus Professor Jenny Connell, and Professor John McCall, who join us here as well, and all of you joining us either online or in the room. Nau mai, haere mai, thank you for being here. Becoming a professor is the result of an enormous amount of hard mahi and of sacrifice. That is not just from Alex, that is also from Alex's family and friends. Anyone who has somebody who is at the peak of their profession, in this case academia, knows that the sacrifices are not just made by the person themselves, but by their family and by their friends. So please, could we take a moment to acknowledge Alex's family for their work and support as well. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Trish Priest, who is going to now introduce Alex. Kia ora, Trish.
Tēnā koutou. Ko Trish Priest, tōku ingoa. I'm standing in for Professor Suetonia Green, the Dean of the Dunedin School of Medicine, to introduce Professor Alex Macmillan. I'm a colleague of Professor Macmillan's in the Department of Preventive and Social Medicine, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce her to the world as a professor, which is what these lectures are for, notwithstanding that many of you already know her and she has actually been a professor since February last year. I'm going to start by asking Alex to stand up and acknowledge the kākahu which she's wearing. It's called Piki Ki Te Paitai, or Ascending to Achievement, and was designed by the master weaver Rānui Ngārimu and woven by a group of kaimahi whatu, including her. It's made of muka, feathers, linen thread and wool. The design of the kākahu is inspired by Ōtākau Whakaihu Waka, the place of many firsts. It represents a journey commencing at the hem, the base of the piki moka, and ascends to a series of paitai which represent success on each journey, with a culmination of many firsts. The huka or tassels represent the challenges to be overcome, and as Grant has said, becoming a professor requires many journeys and overcoming many challenges. Thank you, I'll carry on with you, sit down again. Professor Macmillan, it's important to say that as often as possible tonight, is a tangata tiriti public health medicine specialist and professor of environmental public health. She is an expert and activist at the intersection of environmental sustainability, the built environment and health equity, particularly understanding how we respond collectively to climate change in ways that bring co-benefits for health equity. She's committed to upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi and is well connected internationally and nationally, including with tangata whenua colleagues and Māori organisations. As Grant mentioned, being promoted to professor requires excellent research, which we're going to hear a lot about, also excellent teaching and what the university calls service. Professor Macmillan has taught across a range of areas, particularly in environmental health, bringing to her teaching her passion for her field and sincere desire for students to understand these very important issues. Her service roles have included those at department, school, division and university level, as well as many outside the university that contribute to sustainability and climate change response. As Grant mentioned, Professor Macmillan's research is inter- and transdisciplinary. She uses a combination of action research, community epidemiology, participatory systems mapping and modelling, and policy analysis to support decision-making by iwi, hapu, communities, local authorities and national governments. She has been the principal investigator for Te Aramua Future Streets, a 10-year community intervention study in Ngā Hau Mangere, and she's the co-director of Climate Health Aotearoa, an emerging national research organisation. She's a principal investigator of Te Pūnaha Matatini, Aotearoa New Zealand's Centre of Research Excellence for Complex Systems. Professor Macmillan is a consistent supervisor of research students and disseminates her research through the traditional method of publishing journal articles, but as well and perhaps more importantly through her commitment to action. In my view, the best IPLs teach us something about the person and history of the new professor, as well as about their research. In her lecture, Professor Macmillan will bring together aspects of her personal and professional history with a focus on understanding research as change-making. I've known Professor Macmillan for more than 10 years, and personally, I find her very inspiring, as well as a little intimidating. As you may get from the list of the things that she does, she combines an absolute commitment to practical action with serious intellectual engagement with theory and a deep and thoughtful approach to her work. She is a true academic in the best meaning of that word. I'm sure, like me, you're really looking forward to the lecture, so without further ado, I ask Professor Alex Macmillan to come to the podium and deliver her inaugural professorial lecture.
Tēnā koutou katoa, e ngā rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa. And I add my mihi to mana whenua as I stand here. He tangata tiriti o, he no scale o. The clearest connection to Ukaipua that I can draw is here in South Uist in the Outer Hebrides. with inheritances of pre-Christian kin connections to birds and trees, even though there are no trees in that picture, and a woolen thread back through a long line of knitters and weavers and plant dyers and gardeners. So it feels like a particular honour to be wearing this incredible kākahu pikite paitai, and to make inter-ancestral connections of fibre, thread, plant, and feather with Rānui Ngārimu. These Outer Hebridean islands were almost emptied of their Gaelic-speaking Catholic families by the clearances, and in the case of my ancestors, to the poorhouses and tenements of Glasgow. Nō te whenua moemoe aho. My grandfather was recruited from the Glasgow shipyards to the Australian Navy as a naval architect after the Second World War. Then the men of both sides of my family worked for companies at the forefront of colonial resource extraction in Australia: coal, bauxite, and in the case of this picture, water. I didn't come from an academic or a medical family. This was one of the jobs my father was doing just before I was born, drilling for water in the Northern Territory at the end of the 1960s. This isn't a picture of my father. These sticklers for occupational health and safety are apparently called Derby, Socks and Pissy Pete. In a typical image that has a particular kind of Australian white masculinity, with lots of silences about land, about the presence or absence of Indigenous Australians, and of course about the environmental impacts. I was born on the unceded country of Warrami and Awabakal peoples in Newcastle in New South Wales, a beautiful coastal place, but in the 1970s also a place of smoke, coal, steel, dominated by the BHP steelworks, local collieries, and still a giant coal port. My father's intense determination for social mobility and financial success took us to Thatcher's Britain of the 1980s. Turbulent times politically, socially, and for our family. In the middle of two brothers, I was brought up to be one of the boys in a hyper-masculine environment. But an introspective and thirsty approach to my mother's novels, along with a 4-year stable period of privileged schooling in Oxford and diverse friendships, got me through difficult teenage years. And at that time, I was also drawn into youth peace and justice activism by close friends, including CND and Amnesty International. Having in the end done okay at school, I became the first of both sides of my families to transition from school to university. I want to acknowledge my mother here, though, who graduated soon after I did, once my brothers and I left home, with a BA LLB and went on to become a successful lawyer. Nō tāmaki makoto aho. For geographic reasons that aren't straightforward and fulfilling firm paternal expectations, I gained entry into the brutalist architecture of the other medical school. Alienated and in an unfamiliar land on my own, again, important and long-lasting friendships with people like Jude and her family, the whole McCormick whānau, helped me survive medicine and the university. Many formative moments happened during that time, including the teaching about Hauora Māori at the University of Auckland and spending the weekend with David Tiffany Leach and Tame Iti in the heart of Tūhoe country. And I want to make an honourable mention to the Ponsonby Pool Hall. The scene of many deep hours managing being a square peg in a round hole. I was really privileged to do a medical elective in remote general practice by air back in the Northern Territory where the men of my family worked, where my grandfathers and my father had all worked. In an especially remote Yulnu township of Raminginning beside the Aotearoa swamp in central Arnhem Land, accessible only by plane and four-wheel drive in the dry season, with all food delivered by barge. This exposure to the active violence of colonisation and the interconnected economic, food system, housing drivers of deep health inequities awakened the idea of decolonial public health. During this time, I met and married a dashing young civil engineer, mysterious Andrew, who's here today, still mysterious. And also a pretty awesome life partner and parent. And there's extra bonus points for getting the E.M. Forster Room with a View reference in this photo. Despite having a strong sense that clinical medicine wasn't for me at this time, and even having applied and being turned down for a job in conservation, I still thought I needed to at least have a go at Plan A, which was to be a surgeon, possibly even an orthopedic surgeon. This is the only photo of me as a surgical registrar. Fulfilling the Department of General Surgery ritual that the most junior registrar had to be Santa at the Christmas party. Jenny and John were both there and can testify to how unconvinced the children were. It's very symbolic of the very many ways I didn't fit in surgery. And I'm ever so grateful to Brian Parry, who was the professor of the academic department of surgery at the time, for giving me a lecturing job in the academic surgical department to consider my next moves. In that job, I also completed my first pieces of research. First helping my friend and colleague, Andrew McCormick, who's the nose in this picture, with his research, and then working on my own master's thesis with Brian and Aaron Mary, at the same time as completing a master's in public health. Having fully realised that dressing up as Santa wasn't for me, that job was a really helpful transition out of surgery and into public health. What followed then was a period of intense becoming, trying to find a place for myself that somehow put together my medical training together with the things I found important: trees and birds as kin, increasing concerns about the effects of dominant ways of knowing and being on planet Earth and on local environments, especially becoming more worried and concerned about climate change. Reading and talking to new people a huge amount during my MPH, especially books and journals, including this groundbreaking journal that began in 2004 and combined art, poetry, and science at the intersection of environments and people health. As well as intensely becoming in public health, I was intensely becoming a parent. To Karis, seen here being inducted early into a life of tramping holidays. Since that time, of finishing my MPH and training in public health medicine and becoming a fellow of the New Zealand College of Public Health Medicine, one of the inaugural fellows of that college, I've been interested in evolving theories of change. How do we do research that makes change in policy and practice at the intersection of climate change and health? And there are these additive theories of change that have happened over time, evolved over the last 20 years. The first one being that evidence generation and policy dissemination about health equity co-benefits of reducing emissions would build public and political will for climate action at multiple scales. And at the same time, my boss at the time, Alistair Woodward, who I really acknowledge here, handed me this book by Ivan Illich, who was a Catholic priest and socialist philosopher, a radical socialist philosopher, and it was written in 1974, called Energy and Equity. And in it, he identified the need for a fair and just per capita energy budget that enables well-being for all. In transport, in this book, this converts to a fair and just speed that is barely faster than the speed of a bicycle. During this time, the global and national recognition and discussion of climate change as a major looming public health issue was growing, as well as the possibility that actions to address climate change could address some of the major public health issues of our time. And in 2009, I had a call from a stranger called Scott Metcalf, I had no idea who this fellow was, but he was very concerned, a public health doctor, very concerned about climate change, and wanted to write a paper with me about why New Zealand must rapidly reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to protect health and health equity. We gathered together a larger group of colleagues, of clinical colleagues, doctors who heard about this paper and wanted to be an author. And in the end, we had 250 people who wanted to be an author on this NZMJ paper. So we published the paper that really talked for the first time about the need for New Zealand to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to protect health, and then needed to birth a movement of health professionals called Ora Tai Ao, the New Zealand Climate and Health Council. We had no experience or training with running a health advocacy NGO, but wise help from people like Jenny Connor and Doug Selman from Alcohol Action, Gay Keating and Alison Blakelock, who were really experienced public health advocates, and people who'd been involved in IPPNW. We were very purposeful about it being a Tiriti-based, co-governed and co-led organisation, closely connecting health of people and that of the natural world, with a name gifted to us by Dawiri Jansen. And this is where I really came to start to work closely with Rhys Jones, Ngāti Kahungunu, a Māori public health physician at Te Kupenga Hōora Māori. And this birthing of Ora Tai Ao led to huge opportunities and rich working together with close colleagues and a sense of whānau, including being sent to the Paris 2015 climate COP, where the Paris Agreement was signed. And here seen with Jenny Connor actually on the steps of Parliament with James Shaw, having just presented to Environment Select Committee on climate change and health as the Climate Change Act was being passed into law. The second theory of change is about participatory, deliberative approaches to build consensus in a transdisciplinary way among a range of actors, communities, policy makers, scientists, for effective policy decisions. And this includes my PhD, co-supervised by Alistair Woodward and Jenny Connor, Karen Witten and Robin Kearns, and an influential Māori steering group. It involved participatory, equity-centred modelling about the trip to work and health that was very focused on South Auckland and culminated in a globally influential causal theory about how to turn low levels of bicycling in cities into growing exponential growth in cycling. And also involved putting data into some simulation modelling that for the first time enabled specific, realistic future transport policies to be simulated and connected with health and equity outcomes. In this case for the Auckland region, demonstrating that for every dollar we spend on gold standard cycling infrastructure, we get tens of dollars back in health benefits and equity benefits. And this was the beginning of research relationships that have lasted for the last 20 years. Critically, it also involved a kaupapa Māori project. And we recruited Kimiora Rairino, who's been a co-researcher and friend ever since, to work on the first paper internationally about transport and Indigenous wellbeing and transport justice. It feels absolutely bizarre to show this picture in the current political context, where all cycling and walking projects have been halted. But what followed my PhD was some sincere efforts at policy advocacy and also a coronial inquiry into a spate of cycling deaths around the country, which we took part in and provided advice to, including that the government should put together an expert working group on cycling safety and how to encourage cycling. And the national government, John Key's government, did just that. Under the Minister of Transport at the time, a group of experts and a high-level person from the Automobile Association formed a group called the National Cycling Safety Panel that made a number of recommendations, including that there needed to be a huge investment in urban cycling infrastructure, high quality urban cycling infrastructure, to make it safer, more convenient and easier to bike. And in fact, that government invested the largest amount that any New Zealand government has invested so far to accelerate urban cycleways, a real surprise for a national government. And using words that pretty much came out of my PhD, talking about the health benefits of cycling. Following my PhD, I was recruited by Mike Davis and Taj Oration at the UCL Bartlett Faculty for the Built Environment in London to bring public health systems thinking and modelling to their multidisciplinary team. That was a hugely beneficial experience, riding around London on my Brompton, interviewing 45 high-level policy people about housing and energy and well-being, and putting together a similar kind of modelling about housing to support the UK government to do more integrated thinking about housing, health and climate change. And this team I've continuously worked with since then, including on this current project to support a public health and integrative systems lens in the work of the UK Climate Change Commission and the City of London. While it was an important and intense year of learning, we started to recognise the importance of multi-species relationships, particularly with birds, trees, and more lately fungi, to our young person's well-being. And I had a job I was excited to take up here in Ōtepoti, where Andrew's English-Irish ancestors migrated to, and where the then head of department, Jenny Connor, had taken a chance on me. In the theory of change 3, this consideration that equity-focused community intervention projects were needed to build implementation knowledge and increase institutional and political will for change. So at the start of 2014, we moved into the harbourside village of St Leonard's, partly because of the most beautiful bike commute in the world. It was full of households with children Karis's age, and this bike path and this friendship have been particularly sustaining over that time. Pamela and I spent many of our children's teenage years riding this beautiful commute together while comparing parenting notes. In other words, Pamela telling me how to do things better. And no doubt we've stopped here so she can remind me to look at the moon and the water instead of the weeds and the rubbish. Much of the time since then, and since starting work at Ōtākau Whakaihuaka, has been on this major decade-long project in Ngāho Māngere in South Auckland, which kicked off while we were in London. The grant application for this project in 2012 was such a long shot that I took the fellowship at UCL with confidence that it wouldn't come off. It built on a huge number of existing research and community relationships to co-design street changes with mana whenua and the mainly Pacific Māngere communities, implementing these changes with transport funding and then using research money to assess a range of transport and health equity outcomes. This awesome team, led at various times by Hamish Mackey, myself and Karen Witten, crucially had major support from community leaders, especially La Maunga Lydia Sosini, who you might recognise as a Labour MP now, at the time the chair of the local board, and Tiao Aiturau, an incredible local Pacifica biking champion. Accompanying the co-design of the intervention of street changes was a world-first equity-focused epidemiological study design, very complex in its design and outcomes, and totally upended by COVID. While we were able to show real improvements in crashes, especially for people using active travel, people walking and wheeling, and real benefits for people using wheelchairs to get around, we weren't able to show very much than that in our epidemiology. On the other hand, although the epidemiological findings for resulting change in walking and wheeling haven't been convincing, demonstrating the difficulties with trying to measure the effects of urban change in a pandemic, the real transfer of funds have had a lasting effect in that community. We have effected institutional changes within Auckland Transport and other transport agencies, did a whole lot of biking and walking culture myth-busting, and initiated further equity-focused network investments and community-led activation, including e-bike trials and sustained council support for the ongoing work of Te Ao and Soko here at the Mangere Bike Fit Community Hub. But no real change in the proportion of the transport investment on active travel. And we've come to understand this other additive theory of change 4, the overcoming power imbalances, unethical commercial influences, and the political architecture of the status quo as major barriers to change are what's needed. Including this inaugural piece of research for the Active Travel Studies Journal, the new journal, by daylighting the institutional structures and influence holding back healthy and just change in transport. And including the development of Climate Health Aotearoa and its associated research. Here is Reese again, getting 2 photos. This power rebalancing research organisation, together with colleagues Ken Taiapa, Christina Cleghorn, Jim Cotter, Bridget Masters-Awatere, and with cross-institutional funding, is working out how to build a national research organisation that centres Indigenous knowledge and responds to the recommendations of the Mātiki Mai report on constitutional transformation. And this is including working alongside Reese on his thought leadership for planetary public health in the relational space between Indigenous and Western knowledges. Distressingly, inadequate action on climate change at a global and national level means we're now seeing the social and health effects of flooding and sea level rise unfolding around us, locally here and around the country, with incredibly difficult decisions being placed in the hands of local government and communities. Building on Sarah Harrison's PhD work in South Dunedin, and now as a principal investigator at Te Pūnaha Matatini, we're working to try and translate the complex and dynamic effects of flooding and sea level rise on people's well-being into tools that communities can pick up and use to support those decision-making. Supported by Te Pūnaha Matatini, a community of amazing intellectual and values-driven researchers that I'm really appreciating being part of. I want to finish with this idea of the right speed. As the American philosopher Ben McKean recently pointed out in his distinguished Dekal lectures here in Ōtepoti, finding the right speed for things involves necessary small daily acts of systemic resistance. The right speed for most local trips, as Ivan Illich said, for climate justice may well be barely faster than the speed of a bicycle. The right speed for climate action has to be a speed that repairs and restores relationships and avoids damaging epistemologies of crisis, as Kyle White frames the problematic idea of calling it a climate emergency. The right speed for academic work involves resistance to dominant pressures for throughput and the commercialisation of scholarship to ensure time for the organising work that brings about change, including service to and partnership with local action, like the Otago Housing Alliance and brave, peaceful climate activism, as well as the right speed for the ongoing learning and unlearning and practice of becoming tangata tiriti. I want to say thank you so much, everyone, so many warm and caring connections in the room and online. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tatou tatou e, tu te da mai ai wi, tatou tatou e, whai a te marantanga, me te aroha e ai wi, ki aku Mahi.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Jenny Connor, as aforementioned. It's been my privilege to know Professor Macmillan as a friend and a colleague since her interest in a public health career was embryonic. I still like to think that public health saved her from having to become an illustrious surgeon instead. I want to start by congratulating Alex on her fine academic achievements that have brought us all here tonight. As a learner, a researcher, a teacher, and an advocate, she's been adventurous and she's been challenging. And she's also been collaborative and community-minded, and she's held equity at the centre of her thinking. She's worked hard. I don't think anyone would dispute that. And now we get to celebrate the university formally recognising her body of work as of the highest rank. I also want to thank our speaker for her thoughtful and lively presentation, where she's shown us how, well, she's shown us a lot of things. She's shown us how integrating human and environmental well-being goals is vital in the vast fields of what we call public health. And I think overarching also seems apt, as the survival and enrichment of humanity depends on our environment. And so environmental well-being is surely the greatest public health goal of all. The mention of Tony McMichael's book sparked in me a memory of starting public health training in 1995, where Hilda Firth's long-standing postgraduate environmental health paper pivoted that year to incorporate the recent publication of Planetary Overload, the first of Tony McMichael's, of those two books that were mentioned. Many members of that class found it was their first real exposure to the science and the public health implications of climate change, and it left us changed. This is weighty work that Alex does. It demands vision, commitment, courage, perseverance, and personal resilience. These attributes don't come for free, and Alex has developed them. She's practiced them and she's demonstrated them, along with her intellectual strength and her ability to communicate important ideas. She's set examples that others will follow. Alex was aware from early on that one person's research output and growing the pool of well-informed colleagues and students is not enough to create change. In putting on her activist hat and partnering with Rhys Jones, she made another whole role. And Orotaio has brought together health professionals, in particular, who might otherwise have remained isolated with their concerns or felt powerless to be able to contribute. It was also built around partnership between tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, which was another great example to others following. The many contributions that Alex has made through policy advisory roles, provision of expert advice and involvement in other NGOs more recently, continue to create opportunities for achieving change or actively preparing the ground for them. So this brief presentation of projects reminds me of a few things. One is that you may need to develop your own maps of how the world works before you can work out how you want to change it. Those maps need to reflect the realities of people's lives in order to be useful. Alex has led or collaborated on many research projects, but Future Streets has been a truly awesome collaboration and a monster project, literally building paths for a better future. In a recent conversation I had with Professor Rod Jackson at the University of Auckland, he emphasised to me that Alex had always delivered high quality research. Amongst the multitude of master's theses he had examined over his long career, he claims Professor Macmillan's MPH thesis has two distinctions. One of them is having the least palatable topic by far, and the second, that it remains the best of them all. I want to thank you, Alex, for all you've done since that time, and congratulations once again. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Trudy Sullivan, toko ingoa. I am the Deputy Head of Department of Preventive and Social Medicine and started at the same time as Alex in 2014. Alex started at the beginning of the year, I was at the end of the year, and since then we've been next door neighbours sharing a very thin wall and learning to block each other out with the Zoom calls. Although I am familiar with Alex's research, it was great hearing about her roles and responsibilities as a public health medicine specialist and academic, and her focus on policy and change-oriented research. Being able to contextualise complex systems using innovative methods in a way that policymakers, cross-disciplinary researchers, and community stakeholders can understand requires great skill and effort, and is necessary for research to be translated into action. A large part of this success relies on building long-lasting and meaningful relationships. Good things take time. Many of the collaborations in which Alex is involved started over more than a decade ago. Well, I'll update that to 20 years now that I heard that. Illustrating Alex's commitment to people and relationship building in her research, all with the intent of making a difference. Her expertise is recognised in the many consultancy and advisory roles she undertakes. For example, as a governance board member, acting chair and tangata tiriti co-chair of the Otago Housing Alliance, a regional NGO working towards healthy, sustainable and equitable housing. Alex regularly provides advice to central government policymakers and other organisations at their request, and sometimes of her own volition, about transport, climate change and environmental health. As Trish said, becoming a professor encompasses many aspects of which research is one. It's also about service, community and teaching. As well as being a passionate teacher, Alex has developed new courses and redesigned existing ones, which has involved significant curriculum redevelopment. In her teaching, Alex recognises the diverse views and experiences of students and promotes equity and inclusiveness into her teaching, integrating real-world elements, for example, including a session with the National Maori Leaders Panel. Alex has supervised and mentored many students, from summer studentships through to PhDs. The importance of inspiring, mentoring and instilling a passion in students cannot be overstated. We need to ensure the current and next generation of researchers, and people in general, continue and expand the important work being done on climate change, equity, health and sustainability. Alex takes this part of her job, and actually her entire job, very seriously and leads by example. Thanks, Alex, for sharing with us your personal journey, what drives you in your research, and how your research is making a difference. And as a final note, knowing your views on AI, it was not used. If you can't tell, they were all my own words. So we'd like to offer you a gift.